The year was 2387, and Earth had been silent for 3 long months. Admiral Crix stood on the bridge of his massive warship, the Dominator, looking down at the blue and green planet below. His golden scales caught the light from the ship's control panels as he watched the world that had once been home to billions of humans. Now it belonged to the Zephyrian Empire. "All resistance has been destroyed," reported General Vex, his second in command. The tall alien's 4 arms moved quickly across the control systems. "The human military bases are gone. Their governments no longer exist. Their people are in our camps." "Earth is ours, Admiral." Crix nodded slowly. The invasion had been fast and brutal. The human space fleet had been caught sleeping. Their orbital defenses had crumbled under the power of Zephyrian weapons. The major cities lay in ruins, smoke still rising from some of them even after all this time. The survivors had been rounded up and placed in containment zones across the planet. 3 months ago, the humans had been a proud species. They had colonies on dozens of worlds. Their military was respected throughout this part of the galaxy. But that was before the Zephyrian Empire decided they wanted Earth for themselves. The planet was perfect for their needs, with the right atmosphere and plenty of water. The humans were just in the way. "Send a message to the High Command," Crix ordered. "Tell them that Earth is fully under our control. The human threat has been eliminated." But deep in the Rocky Mountains of what had once been called Colorado, something moved in the darkness. Far below the surface, in a military bunker that had been forgotten by most of the world, machines began to wake up. Emergency lights flickered on, casting red shadows on metal walls. The air recycling system hummed to life. Colonel Jake Murphy opened his eyes. His body felt stiff and cold, but his mind was sharp. The stasis chamber around him hissed as it opened, releasing him from the artificial sleep that had kept him alive for the past 3 months. He was a big man, built like a fighter, with scars on his face and arms that told stories of many battles. His brown hair was short and practical, and his green eyes were already alert and angry. Around him, 11 other chambers were opening. His team was waking up. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were the Ghost Battalion, the most elite special operations unit that humanity had ever created. Each of them had been enhanced with experimental technology that made them faster, stronger, and smarter than normal humans. They had been trained to fight wars that others could not even imagine. "Status report," Jake said, his voice rough from the long sleep. He stepped out of the chamber and immediately began checking his equipment. His enhanced muscles felt good, ready for action. Sergeant Lisa Kane was the first to respond. She was a small woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, but Jake knew she could blow up a building with things she found in a kitchen. "All gear is working, sir. The bunker shields held during the attack were alive and ready." Corporal Danny Wright was already at the communication station. He was young, maybe 25, with black hair and quick hands. "Sir, I'm picking up Zephyrian signals, lots of them. At least 50 big ships in orbit. They're not even trying to hide. They think the war is over." Jake walked to the main computer and began bringing up information. The screen showed him what had happened to his world. The cities were destroyed. The military bases were gone. The government buildings were empty. Millions of humans were in alien camps, being used as workers or worse. "How long have we been out?" asked Sergeant Pete Coleman. He was the team's medic, a tall man with steady hands and a calm voice. 3 months, Jake replied, reading the data. 3 months since the invasion began. 3 months since they thought they beat us. The bunker had been built in secret, designed to protect a small team of special operations soldiers in case of exactly this kind of attack. It was deep underground, shielded from sensors, and stocked with everything they would need to survive and fight. The stasis chambers had kept them alive while the world burned above them. "Sir," said Captain Roy Henderson, a former Navy SEAL with red hair and a beard, "what are our orders?" Jake looked at his team. These 11 men and women had volunteered for a mission that everyone knew was probably suicide. They had agreed to sleep through the worst of any invasion and wake up behind enemy lines. Now they were the only free humans left on Earth. Our orders are simple, Jake said. We take our planet back. Staff Sergeant Amy Brooks laughed. She was a small woman, with dark skin and bright eyes who could blend into any crowd. 12 of us against an entire alien empire? I like those odds. Jake began pulling up tactical information on the screens. The Zephyrians had made Earth their regional headquarters. They had troops in every major city. Their ships controlled the sky. Their technology was more advanced than anything humans had ever built. By every measure, the war was over and humanity had lost, but Jake had spent his entire adult life learning how to fight enemies that were bigger, stronger, and better equipped than he was. The key was never to fight them the way they expected to be fought. They think like soldiers, he told his team. They have ranks and rules and procedures. They expect us to line up and fight them like soldiers too. But we're not soldiers anymore. We're ghosts. The team began checking their weapons and equipment. Everything had survived the long sleep. They had advanced human technology that the Zephyrians had never seen. They had knowledge of every tunnel, every building, every hiding place on Earth. Most importantly, they had something the aliens could never understand. They were fighting for their home. Listen up, Jake said, his voice carrying the authority of years of command. The Zephyrians think they've won. They think humans are beaten. They're about to learn what happens when you attack Earth. He pointed to the tactical display. They're spread out across the planet, holding key positions. Their supply lines are long. Their communication systems are working overtime. They're confident, maybe too confident. Sergeant Lisa Kane was already preparing her explosives. Where do we start, sir? Jake smiled for the first time since waking up. It was not a nice smile. We start by reminding them that this is our planet. We know every rock, every tree, every building. We know how to survive in places they can't even imagine. We know how to fight dirty. The team spent the next few hours preparing. They studied the intelligence data that the bunker's computers had collected. They planned their first strikes. They prepared for a war that would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Danny Wright had been monitoring Zephyrian communications. Sir, they're talking about Earth like it's already a colony world. They're bringing in civilians, setting up permanent bases. They think they're here to stay. Then we'll have to change their minds, Jake said. One dead alien at a time. As the team made their final preparations, Jake thought about what they were facing. The Zephyrian Empire controlled hundreds of worlds. They had technology that could destroy planets. They had armies that numbered in the billions. Against all of that, Earth could only offer 12 humans with guns and a really bad attitude. But Jake had learned something in his years of fighting. Technology could be overcome. Numbers could be beaten. The only thing that really mattered in war was the will to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless. The Zephyrians were about to learn what humans were really made of. They were about to discover that conquering Earth and holding Earth were two very different things. Most importantly, they were about to find out that humans don't know how to quit. Jake looked at his team one last time. These 11 men and women were all that stood between humanity and extinction. But they were enough. They had to be enough. Let's go to work, he said. 3 weeks had passed since Jake Murphy and his team had awakened from their long sleep. 3 weeks of moving through the shadows, striking at the aliens who thought they owned Earth. The Zephyrian Empire was learning that conquering a planet and holding it were very different things. Jake crouched behind the ruins of what had once been a gas station, watching a Zephyrian patrol move down the broken highway. The aliens walked in perfect formation, their weapons ready, their communication devices crackling with reports. They looked confident. Like soldiers who knew they had already won the war. They were wrong. Jake spoke quietly into his throat microphone. Lisa, you in position? Ready when you are, boss, came the reply from Sergeant Lisa Kane. She was hidden in the wreckage of a truck stop 200 meters away, her explosives planted and waiting. Danny, what's the communication chatter? Corporal Danny Wright's voice was calm and professional. 3 more patrols within 5 kilometers. No air support for another 20 minutes. We have a clean window. Jake watched the patrol get closer. 6 Zephyrians, each one 7 feet tall with golden scales and 4 arms. Their armor was advanced, their weapons could cut through steel, and their training was excellent. In a fair fight, any one of them could probably kill 3 normal humans, but Jake and his team had given up on fair fights a long time ago. "Execute," Jake whispered. The explosion came from underneath the highway. Lisa had spent hours the night before placing charges in the storm drains that ran under the road. When she triggered them, the entire section of pavement erupted upward, sending chunks of concrete and metal flying in all directions. The Zephyrian patrol was thrown into chaos. 2 of them were killed instantly by the blast. The others were wounded and confused, their perfect formation destroyed. Their communication equipment damaged by the debris. That was when Jake and his team struck. They came from all sides, moving fast and silent. Jake put 3 bullets into the nearest alien before it could raise its weapon. Roy Henderson, the former Navy SEAL, took down another with a knife to the throat. Amy Brooks appeared behind the last surviving Zephyrian like a ghost, her weapon firing before the alien even knew she was there. The entire fight lasted less than 30 seconds. 6 dead aliens, no human casualties, and they were already moving to their next position before the alien reinforcements could arrive. "Clean work," Jake said as they regrouped in an abandoned warehouse. But this was just the beginning. Over the past 3 weeks, the Ghost Battalion had carried out 17 similar attacks. They had destroyed supply convoys, communication towers, and fuel depots. They had killed more than 200 Zephyrian soldiers without losing a single member of their team. But more importantly, they had begun to change how the aliens thought about Earth. Admiral Crix stood in the command center of his ship, staring at the reports that covered his desk. Each one told the same story. Humans were still fighting. Somehow, somewhere, a small group of them had survived and was making his occupation much more difficult than it should have been. "How is this possible?" he demanded of General Vex. "We destroyed their military. We captured their leaders. We control their cities. How are they still able to mount organized resistance?" General Vex's forearms moved nervously as he sorted through the data. "The attacks are too precise to be random survivors. Someone is coordinating them. Someone with military training and advanced equipment." "How many?" Crix asked. "Based on the attack patterns, we estimate no more than 15 individuals, possibly fewer." Admiral Crix felt something he had not experienced in years of conquest: confusion. 15 humans were causing more problems than entire rebel armies on other worlds. It made no sense. "Double the patrols," he ordered. "Triple the security around our supply lines. Find these humans and eliminate them." But Jake had no intention of making it easy for them. He had spent his entire career learning how to fight enemies that were bigger and stronger than he was. The key was never to fight them where they expected to be fought. The Ghost Battalion had divided into 3 groups, each one operating in a different part of the continent. Jake led one team, Roy Henderson led another, and Amy Brooks commanded the third. They moved constantly, never staying in one place for more than a few hours, always hitting the aliens where they least expected it. Captain Roy Henderson crouched in the ruins of Denver, watching a Zephyrian supply depot. The aliens had taken over a human warehouse and were using it to store fuel and ammunition for their vehicles. It was heavily guarded. With sensors and automated weapons protecting every entrance, Roy had been studying the facility for 3 days, learning the patterns of the guards, the timing of the supply runs, and the weaknesses in their security. He had found what he was looking for, a drainage tunnel that ran under the building, too small for the tall aliens to use but perfect for humans. "Pete, you ready?" Roy whispered to Sergeant Pete Coleman, who was beside him in the tunnel. "Charges are set," Pete replied. "We'll have about 10 minutes before the whole place goes up." They moved through the tunnel like shadows, their enhanced reflexes allowing them to navigate the tight space without making a sound. The aliens above them had no idea that death was crawling beneath their feet. Roy's explosives were not random. He had placed them at specific points that would create the maximum damage with the minimum risk to nearby human civilians. When they detonated, the entire depot would be destroyed, along with enough fuel to power a dozen alien vehicles for months. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Staff Sergeant Amy Brooks was conducting a very different kind of operation. She had spent the past week infiltrating a Zephyrian communication facility in the ruins of Atlanta. Her ability to move unseen and her knowledge of alien behavior patterns had allowed her to get close to their operations center. Amy was not there to kill anyone. She was there to listen and learn. The Zephyrians were careless with their communications, assuming that no humans were left who could understand their language. They were wrong about that too. Amy had been recording their conversations for days, learning about their supply schedules, their troop movements, and their plans for the human population. The information she was gathering would allow Jake to plan attacks that would hurt the aliens where they were most vulnerable. "Jake, this is Amy," she whispered into her communication device. "I've got intelligence on their next supply run. 3 trucks, lightly guarded, moving through Sector 7 tomorrow at dawn." Jake's voice came back immediately. "Copy that. We'll be ready." But the Ghost Battalion was doing more than just gathering intelligence and blowing things up. They were beginning to have a psychological effect on the Zephyrian forces. The aliens had expected human resistance to collapse quickly once their government and military were destroyed. Instead, they were facing an enemy that seemed to be everywhere, and nowhere at the same time. The Zephyrian soldiers were becoming nervous. They jumped at shadows. They fired at sounds that might have been nothing. They began to see threats in every pile of rubble, every abandoned building, every dark corner. "The humans are like ghosts," one alien soldier reported to his commander. "They appear, they kill, and they vanish before we can respond. Our weapons are useless against an enemy we cannot see." Jake smiled when Danny Wright intercepted that transmission. The psychological warfare was working. The aliens were beginning to fear the very planet they had conquered. "Fear is a weapon," Jake told his team during one of their brief meetings. "If we can make them afraid of every shadow, every sound, every human face they see, we've already won half the battle." Sergeant Lisa Kane was preparing for their next operation, a strike against a Zephyrian command post in the ruins of Chicago. "What about the human civilians in the camps?" she asked. "Are they going to start fighting back too?" Jake had been thinking about the same thing. His team could only do so much. To really drive the aliens off Earth, they would need the help of the millions of humans who were still alive but trapped in the alien camps. "That's phase 2, he said. "First we make the aliens nervous, then we make them scared. Then we give our people hope." The Ghost Battalion had been operating for 3 weeks, and already the Zephyrian Empire was beginning to realize that their conquest of Earth was not as complete as they had thought. 12 humans with guns and determination were proving that the war was far from over, but Jake knew that this was just the beginning. The real fight was yet to come. 2 months had passed since Jake Murphy and his Ghost Battalion had begun their war against the Zephyrian Empire. What started as 12 people with guns had grown into something much bigger. Across the planet, humans were beginning to wake up and fight back. In the ruins of Houston, Dr. Helen Garcia worked by candlelight in the basement of a destroyed hospital. She had been a NASA engineer before the invasion, designing spacecraft engines and navigation systems. Now she was building weapons from alien technology and human creativity. "The key is understanding how they think," she explained to a group of 20 survivors who had gathered around her makeshift workbench. "The Zephyrians build everything to be perfect and efficient, but humans have always been better at making things work when they're broken." Helen held up a small device that looked like a combination of a Zephyrian power cell and a human radio. "This is a disruptor. When you activate it near their equipment, it makes their weapons jam and their communications fail. It won't last long, but it might give you enough time to escape or fight back." The people around her were not soldiers. They were teachers, mechanics, store clerks, and office workers. But they were angry and they were learning to be dangerous. One Of them, a man named Bill, who had been a construction worker before the invasion, raised his hand. "How do we get close enough to use these things without getting killed?" Helen smiled. "That's where the Ghost Battalion comes in. They've been teaching people all over the planet how to fight like they do. Hit fast, hit hard, and disappear before." The aliens know what happened. 3,000 miles away, in the ruins of Seattle, former Marine Lieutenant Ben Taylor was doing exactly that. He had been captured during the initial invasion and spent 6 weeks in a Zephyrian prison camp before escaping. Now he was teaching other survivors how to turn ordinary objects into weapons. A kitchen knife can kill a Zephyrian just as dead as a military rifle, he told his students. The trick is getting close enough to use it. That means moving quiet, staying hidden, and hitting them when they don't expect it. Ben's group had grown from 5 escapees to more than 100 fighters. They lived in the tunnels under the city, coming out only at night to strike at alien patrols and supply lines. They had learned to use the ruins of their own city as a weapon, turning every collapsed building and broken street into a trap for their enemies. "Remember," Ben continued, "the aliens think like soldiers. They expect us to line up and fight them fair, but there's nothing fair about invasion. There's nothing fair about what they did to our world. So we don't fight fair either." News of these resistance groups was spreading through secret networks across the planet. Survivors were learning that they were not alone, that humans were fighting back everywhere. The knowledge gave them hope, and hope was a dangerous thing. For the Zephyrian Empire, Admiral Crick stood in the command center of his ship, looking at reports that made him more worried with each passing day. The human resistance was growing stronger, not weaker. What had started as isolated attacks by a few survivors had become a planet-wide uprising. "How many resistance cells are we tracking now?" he asked General Vex. "At least 300 confirmed." "Groups?" Vex replied, his forearms moving nervously across the control panels. "Possibly twice that many. They're organizing, sharing information, coordinating their attacks." Crix felt something he had not experienced in decades of conquest. Doubt. This should not be possible. We destroyed their military. We captured their leaders. We control their major cities. How are they still able to organize resistance on this scale? "The Ghost Battalion," General Vex said. "Our intelligence suggests that the original 12 survivors have been training others. They're spreading their knowledge and tactics to civilians across the planet." Meanwhile, Jake Murphy was doing exactly that. He had traveled to a hidden camp in the mountains of Montana, where more than 200 survivors had gathered. These were people who had escaped from the alien camps, who had lost everything but refused to give up. "Fighting the Zephyrians is not about having better weapons," Jake told the assembled crowd. "It's about understanding what they don't understand. About us, they think war is about armies and battles and territory. But for us, this is about survival. This is about home. This is about everything we are as human beings." Sergeant Lisa Kane was teaching a group of teenagers how to make explosives from household chemicals. "The aliens have better technology than we do," she explained. "But they don't understand improvisation. They don't understand creativity. They don't understand that humans can make a bomb out of cleaning supplies and a digital watch." Captain Roy Henderson was working with a group of former police officers, teaching them how to move through urban environments without being detected. "The key is to think like prey," he said. "Stay low, stay quiet, and always have 3 ways out of any situation." But the most important thing happening in the camp was not the training, it was the hope. For the first time since the invasion, humans were beginning to believe that they could win. "We're not just fighting for Earth," Jake told his audience. "We're fighting for the idea that humans don't surrender. We're fighting to prove that no matter how big the enemy is, no matter how advanced their technology, they can't break the human spirit." The psychological effect of the growing resistance was beginning to show in the Zephyrian forces. Soldiers who had been confident and professional were becoming nervous and trigger-happy. They were seeing threats everywhere, firing at shadows, and making mistakes that cost them lives and equipment. Staff Sergeant Amy Brooks had been monitoring alien communications from her position in the ruins of Phoenix. What she was hearing told her that the Ghost Battalion's strategy was working better than they had hoped. "The morale reports are getting worse every day," she reported to Jake during one of their encrypted communication sessions. "They're requesting more troops, more equipment, more support. Some of their commanders are talking about pulling back to fortified positions." Jake smiled. "That's exactly what we want. The more they consolidate their forces, the easier it becomes for our people to move around and cause trouble." The resistance was also learning to use the aliens' own technology against them. Dr. Garcia's disruptors were being copied and improved by engineers and mechanics in hiding all over the planet. Zephyrian weapons were being captured and reverse-engineered. Communication equipment was being hacked and turned into tools for the human resistance. In the ruins of Detroit, a group of former auto workers had figured out how to modify Zephyrian vehicles to run on human fuel. They were using these captured machines to strike at alien supply lines and disappear before reinforcements could arrive. "It's like working on cars," explained Frank, a mechanic who had become one of the resistance leaders. "Once you understand how the engine works, you can make it do things the designer never intended." The Zephyrians were beginning to realize that their conquest of Earth was turning into something they had not expected, a grinding war of attrition that was consuming their resources and wearing down their forces. They had planned for a quick victory followed by a peaceful occupation. Instead, they were facing an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. "We need to change our strategy," Admiral Crix told his staff during an emergency meeting. "The current approach is not working. These humans are more resilient than we anticipated." General Vex brought up tactical displays showing the locations of known resistance activity. The entire planet was covered with red dots. "Sir, we could begin executing civilians in retaliation for resistance attacks. That might discourage further uprising." But Crix was beginning to understand something about humans that his empire had never faced before. "No," he said. "That would only make them angrier. These are not a people who can be frightened into submission. They become more dangerous when they're angry." Jake was coordinating with resistance cells across North America when Danny Wright brought him an intercepted transmission that changed everything. The message was from a Zephyrian commander to his superiors, requesting permission to begin using more brutal tactics against the human population. "They're getting desperate," Jake told his team. "They're starting to realize that they can't win this war the way they plan to fight it." Sergeant Pete Coleman looked up from the medical supplies he was organizing. "What's our next move?" Jake looked at the map of North America, covered with markers showing resistance activity. 6 months ago, there had been 12 humans fighting the Zephyrian Empire. Now there were thousands, possibly tens of thousands, all of them learning to fight like ghosts. "We keep doing what we're doing," Jake said. "We keep teaching people that they don't have to be victims. We keep showing them that humans don't know how to quit. And we keep reminding the aliens that this is our planet. And we're not going anywhere." The awakening of human resistance was no longer just about Jake Murphy and his Ghost Battalion. It had become something much bigger, an entire species refusing to accept defeat. The Zephyrians were about to learn that conquering Earth had been the easy part. Holding it was going to be impossible. 6 months after the invasion began, Admiral Crix faced the worst crisis of his military career. What should have been a simple planetary conquest had turned into a nightmare that was consuming his forces and threatening the entire Zephyrian operation on Earth. "We are losing control," General Vex reported during the morning briefing. His forearms moved frantically across the control panels as he brought up the latest damage reports. "In the past week alone, we have lost 17 supply convoys, 12 communication towers, and 3 fuel depots. Our casualty rates are now higher than they were during the initial invasion." Crix stared at the tactical display that showed the current state of Earth. Red markers indicated areas of human resistance activity. 6 months ago, there had been perhaps a dozen such markers. Now the entire planet was covered in red. "How many humans are we fighting?" Crix asked. "Conservative estimates suggest at least 50,000 active fighters," Vex replied. but the actual number could be much higher. They operate in small cells that are difficult to track and nearly impossible to eliminate completely. What worried Crix most was not the numbers. It was the way the humans fought. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds, but they had never faced an enemy like this. 3,000 miles below, Jake Murphy was putting the finishing touches on a plan that would change the course of the war. He stood in a hidden command center built into the ruins of an old subway tunnel beneath New York City. Around him, representatives from resistance cells across North America were gathered for the largest coordinated operation in human history. The aliens think like a machine, Jake explained to the assembled leaders. Every action has a set response. Every threat is met with predetermined tactics. But humans are chaos. We break their algorithms just by being unpredictable. Captain Steve Anderson, a former Air Force pilot who now led the aerial resistance, nodded in agreement. My people have been using crop dusters and civilian helicopters to hit their transport ships. They keep putting up the same defenses, but we keep finding new ways around them. Steve's operation was typical of how the human resistance had evolved. When the aliens destroyed the military airports, he had moved his pilots to hidden strips in farmland. When they shot down his military aircraft, he had switched to civilian planes that the aliens overlooked. When they blocked his communications, he had gone back to using simple radio signals that their advanced systems couldn't track. The key is adaptation, Steve continued. Every time they think they've figured us out, we change the rules. Sergeant Linda Foster had been training new fighters in the wilderness camps scattered across the continent. Her methods were brutal but effective, turning ordinary civilians into guerrilla fighters who could operate independently in any environment. We're not just teaching them to fight, Linda explained. We're teaching them to think like predators, to use everything around them as a weapon, to see opportunity where the aliens see obstacles. Linda's trainees were spread out across dozens of camps, each one hidden in terrain that the aliens found difficult to navigate. They lived off the land, moved constantly, and struck without warning at targets that seemed impossible to reach. But Jake's masterstroke was not military, it was psychological. He had realized that the Zephyrians' greatest weakness was their inability to understand human nature. They expect us to behave rationally, Jake told his commanders. They expect us to surrender when the odds are impossible. They expect us to prioritize survival over victory. But humans don't work that way. The resistance had begun employing tactics that made no sense to alien military thinking. They would attack heavily fortified positions while ignoring easy targets. They would retreat when they were winning and advance when they were losing. They would use children's toys as weapons and turn birthday parties into military operations. Captain Tony Rivers, a former Delta Force operator, had recently led a raid on a Zephyrian command center using nothing but fireworks, playground equipment, and a dozen volunteers who had never held a weapon before the invasion. The psychological impact on the alien forces had been devastating. They're starting to see threats everywhere, Tony reported. Yesterday, a patrol opened fire on a playground because they thought the swings were some kind of weapon system. They're losing their minds. The aliens were indeed losing their minds. Zephyrian soldiers who had been trained for decades in conventional warfare found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow any known military doctrine. They began firing at shadows, calling for backup against imaginary threats, and requesting transfers off the planet. Dr. Helen Garcia had been working on what she called the Confusion Project. Using her knowledge of both human and alien technology, she had created devices that did nothing but make noise and flashlights. When placed around alien positions, they created the impression of massive human forces preparing for attack. The beauty is that they don't actually do anything, Helen explained. But the aliens don't know that. They waste time and resources preparing for attacks that never come, while our real fighters hit them somewhere else entirely. The psychological warfare was working so well that some Zephyrian units had begun firing on their own forces when stress and paranoia overwhelmed their training. Command structures were breaking down as officers lost confidence in their ability to predict human behavior. Sir, General Vex reported to Admiral Crix, we have 17 separate incidents this week of our units engaging what they believe to be human resistance fighters. In each case, the targets turned out to be other Zephyrian patrols. Crix felt a familiar sensation that he had not experienced since his early days as a junior officer: fear. Not fear of death or injury, but fear of failure. Fear that he had made a mistake so fundamental that it might cost him his career and his empire a valuable world. What do our psychological experts say about human behavior? He asked. That's part of the problem, sir, Vex replied. Our experts cannot agree on how to predict human actions. Every model we create, the humans seem to deliberately violate. It's as if they know we're trying to understand them and change their behavior specifically to confuse us. Meanwhile, Jake was coordinating the largest operation in resistance history. Using secure communications networks that spanned the globe, he was planning simultaneous attacks on alien positions across every continent. The goal was not to win territory or destroy specific targets. The goal was to prove to both humans and aliens that the Earth was still fighting. Remember, Jake told his commanders, this is not about military victory. This is about showing every human on this planet that we haven't given up. This is about proving to the aliens that we will never stop fighting. Sergeant Amy Brooks had infiltrated the Alien Communications Center in Atlanta and was ready to disrupt their command network at the exact moment the attacks began. Her ability to mimic alien behavior patterns had allowed her to get closer to their operations than any human should have been able to. I'm in position, she reported. When you give the signal, their entire communication system on this continent will go dark for at least 6 hours. Captain Roy Henderson was leading a team of urban fighters in the ruins of Chicago. They had spent weeks mapping every tunnel, every basement, every hiding place in the city. When the operation began, they would appear in a dozen locations simultaneously, striking at targets that the aliens thought were secure. We own this city, Roy told his team. Every brick, every piece of broken glass, every shadow. The aliens are just visitors here, and it's time they learned what happens to unwelcome guests. The operation would begin at dawn, coordinated across time zones to create the impression of a planet-wide uprising. But Jake knew that the real victory would not be measured in alien casualties or destroyed equipment. The real victory would be the message it sent to every human still alive. Earth was still fighting. They came here thinking they could break us, Jake said in his final briefing. They thought superior technology and overwhelming force would make us surrender. They were wrong. Tomorrow we show them what humans are really made of. The Zephyrian Empire was about to face the full fury of a species that refused to accept defeat. They were about to learn that humans become most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose. The liberation of Earth began not with explosions or battles, but with a single voice speaking across every communication channel on the planet. Jake Murphy stood in the ruins of the Pentagon, surrounded by captured Zephyrian equipment that his team had turned into the most powerful broadcast system in human history. To the Zephyrian Empire, Jake's voice carried across space to every alien ship, every communication device, every listening post in the galaxy. You came to Earth believing you understood warfare. You thought superior technology and overwhelming force would break us. You calculated our military strength, our industrial capacity, our population numbers. But you never calculated the one thing that defines humanity. We don't know how to quit. Behind him, Danny Wright worked frantically at the communication controls, making sure the signal reached every corner of the planet. Across the globe, millions of humans who had been living in fear and hiding were hearing the voice of their resistance for the first time. In the alien prison camps, guards watched in confusion as their human prisoners began to smile. In the hidden resistance bases, fighters prepared for the coordinated attack that would begin in minutes. In the Zephyrian command centers, officers stared at their screens in disbelief as their entire communication network was hijacked by a species they thought they had defeated. You made a mistake, Jake continued, his voice calm but filled with deadly certainty. You thought conquering our cities meant conquering our spirit. You thought destroying our armies meant destroying our will to fight. You thought taking our planet meant taking our humanity. You were wrong about everything. Admiral Crick stood on the bridge of his flagship, listening to words that made his blood run cold. Around him, his officers waited for orders, but Crix found himself unable to speak. In 40 years of conquest, he had never heard anything like this broadcast. Most defeated species begged for mercy or negotiated for survival. This human was doing neither. "This is what we're made of," Jake's voice continued. "When you push us, we push back harder. When you hurt us, we become stronger. When you think you've beaten us, we show you what defeat really means." As Jake spoke, the largest coordinated military operation in human history began. On every continent, in every major city, in thousands of small towns and hidden camps, humans emerged from the shadows to reclaim their world. In New York, Captain Roy Henderson led 300 urban fighters up from the subway tunnels. They moved through the city like ghosts, appearing in a dozen locations at once, striking at alien positions that had seemed secure just moments before. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting enemies who knew every street, every building, every hiding place in the city. "Welcome to New York," Roy said into his radio as his team overran an alien communication post. "Population, really angry humans." In Los Angeles, Sergeant Linda Foster's wilderness fighters came down from the mountains. Like a force of nature, they had lived off the land for months, learning to move without being seen, to strike without warning, to disappear before the enemy could respond. Now they brought that knowledge to urban warfare, turning the city into a hunting ground. "Every building is cover," Linda told her fighters as they moved through the streets. "Every alley is an escape route. Every rooftop is a firing position. This is our city. Make them feel like visitors." But the most devastating attack came from an unexpected source. Dr. Helen Garcia had spent months secretly installing her virus in every piece of Zephyrian equipment that the Resistance had captured and returned to the alien supply chain. The virus did not destroy their technology. Instead, it made it unreliable. At the exact moment Jake began his broadcast, weapons began misfiring across the planet. Communication systems started giving false information. Transportation vehicles broke down in the middle of missions. The perfectly efficient Zephyrian technology that had conquered hundreds of worlds began failing at the worst possible time. "What's happening to our equipment?" General Vex demanded as his control panels flickered and sparked around him. "Unknown malfunction in all systems," his technician replied, his forearms moving desperately across backup controls that were also beginning to fail. "It's like the machines are turning against us." Captain Steve Anderson led the aerial assault, using every flying machine the Resistance had been able to repair or capture. Crop dusters flew alongside stolen alien fighters. News helicopters carried former military pilots armed with improvised weapons. Even civilian drones had been turned into weapons platforms. "Air superiority is overrated," Steve announced over the radio as his mixed fleet of human and alien aircraft engaged the surprised Zephyrian air patrols. "What matters is knowing how to fly angry." The psychological impact of the coordinated attack was even more devastating than the physical damage. For months, the Zephyrians had been dealing with small, isolated resistance groups. Now they faced what appeared to be an entire planet in rebellion, with humans emerging from hiding places they had never suspected existed. Staff. Sergeant Amy Brooks had waited in the Alien Communication Center in Atlanta for this exact moment. As Jake's broadcast began, she activated the virus that Dr. Garcia had helped her install in the Zephyrian command network. Within minutes, alien commanders across the continent found themselves unable to communicate with their forces. "Goodbye," Amy whispered to the alien technicians as she slipped out of the facility. They would not discover her sabotage until it was too late to matter. Captain Tony Rivers led an assault on the main Zephyrian base in Texas, using tactics that no military academy in the galaxy had ever taught. His fighters attacked from directions that should have been impossible, using weapons that should not have worked, employing strategies that made no logical sense. "Remember," Tony told his team, "We're not trying to win a battle. We're trying to drive them crazy." The effect on the Zephyrian forces was exactly what Jake had hoped for. Faced with attacks from every direction by enemies who seemed to know their every weakness, alien units began to break down. Some retreated to their strongest positions, others fled toward their ships. A few simply stopped fighting altogether. "Sir," General Vex reported to Admiral Crix, "we're receiving retreat requests from commanders on every continent. Our forces are reporting that they're surrounded, outnumbered, and cut off from support." Admiral Crix stared at the tactical display. That showed his Empire's forces scattered across Earth's surface. Red markers indicated human attacks. There were hundreds of them, possibly thousands. It was impossible to tell where the real threats were and where the humans were simply making noise to confuse his forces. "How many humans are we fighting?" he asked. "Unknown, sir." "Could be millions?" "Our intelligence networks have been completely compromised." For the first time in his career, Admiral Crix found himself facing an enemy he could not understand. The humans were not fighting like any species he had ever encountered. They were not trying to hold territory or protect resources. They were fighting for something he could not quantify, the simple refusal to accept defeat. Jake concluded his broadcast with words that would be remembered for generations. "This is what we're made of. We are the species that looked at the darkness between the stars and decided to explore it. We are the people who faced extinction and chose to fight instead of surrender. We are humanity, and we don't know how to quit." The Zephyrian withdrawal began within hours. Faced with a planet-wide uprising, compromised technology, and an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every attack, Admiral Crix made the decision. That would save his remaining forces and end the occupation of Earth. "All units begin immediate evacuation," he ordered. "We are abandoning Earth." As the alien ships lifted off from Earth's surface for the final time, Jake stood with his team on the roof of the White House, watching the sky clear for the first time in 7 months. Around them, the city was filled with the sounds of celebration, as humans emerged from hiding to reclaim their world. "Think they'll be back?" Sergeant Lisa Kane asked, watching the last of the alien ships disappear into space. Jake smiled, his enhanced eyes already scanning the horizon for whatever threat might come next. "Let them come. They'll find out what we're really made of." The liberation of Earth became a legend that spread throughout the galaxy, a warning to any species that might consider humanity an easy target. The Zephyrian Empire had learned what countless enemies throughout history had discovered: humans become most dangerous when they have everything to lose and refuse to lose it. One man had shown them what humanity was made of. The universe would never make that mistake again.